Okay, great. Thanks, Jack. Okay, go ahead, Deb.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Deborah Nelson. I'm an assistant at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, also known as NYMTC. We thank you all for joining us today for the September 11th Memorial Program student presentations. To me, it's because it brings the culmination of a year's hard work by 4 amazing students, as well as their mentors in the various agencies. When I joined NYMTC a few years back, I was really excited to learn about this great scholarship program. NYMTC sponsors this program in honor of 3 colleagues that they lost in the September 11th attacks. And this is particularly meaningful this year as we commemorate the 20th anniversary of this devastating event. In honor of Ignatius Adanga, Charles Lesperance, and See Wong Shum, each year NYMTC provides scholarships and research opportunities to graduate students through the September 11th Memorial Program for Regional Transportation Planning. So we are really provide this research and the scholarship opportunities for the talented students who we hope will become our future leaders in transportation planning. And not only does it provide them with that, but it also encourages innovations and provides NYMTC staff, NYMTC member agencies, unique and tangible benefits. It's a very interesting program wherein the students are selected through a competitive process and they receive a scholarship, but they're also spent a year with their mentors in their sponsoring agencies to work on a research project which has practical and applied outcomes. And you'll see today through these presentations the types of projects, and they really go a full staff. We've had them in Port Authority, DOT, MTA, and so students are matched with the sponsors so that they grow not in their research, but professionally. So it's really kind of a very much of a win-win arrangement. It fosters inquisitiveness, innovation, excitement, and it's exciting also for the staff who are working with them because we're bringing new to us. These 3 friends and colleagues from NYMTC that we've lost. So I'm very, very proud to be a part of it. Before the students present on their work, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jerry Bogart, who's also an assistant director in NYMTC, and he was a personal friend of these 3 colleagues for whom this scholarship is established. Jerry?
Thanks, Deb. Welcome, everyone. This program is very important to the staff of NYMTC in commemoration of our 3 lost colleagues. It's very much a living memorial. That was the concept of the program. In that it's something that keeps their names alive and their stories. And every year we revisit what happened to them and what they did when they were with NYMTC staff. But at the same time, it fosters the development of young people who are interested in transportation planning and other planning fields.
Okay, so would everyone please mute their microphones?
Okay, great. So it does foster the educational development of people who are doing the types of work that that Shum, that Ignatius, and that Charles were doing in their time with NYMTC staff. So it, as Deb alluded to, it has that that double purpose in many ways. Plus, the student projects are identified by NYMTC's members and by NYMTC staff. They're relevant to the regional planning process that we have to undertake to obtain federal dollars for transportation projects. And they're also consistent with NYMTC's members' shared vision as expressed in our recently adopted regional transportation plan. So the work that's being done is not by any means make work for the students. These are real projects and real needs the students are contributing in a real way to NYMTC as an organization or to its individual member agencies. And that's significant also, and it's very important. They're getting a great experience, plus they're helping us to do what needs to be done for the region. I do want to just acknowledge the partnership we've had with the University Transportation Research Center since this program first started. By the way, this program was announced in November of 2004 when NYMTC finally moved back to Lower Manhattan after being in temporary space in Queens since 9/11. It was announced in November 2004, and the academic initiative began with the 2005-2006 academic year. Since then, I don't have an exact number, but we have hosted well over 75 students in this program, and that's wonderful. And we've done that in partnership with the University Transportation Research Center. Camille Kamga, Penny Eichmeyer, and others have supported this from the academic side. Without them, we never would have been able to pull this program off, and we're very, very appreciative of their involvement and their support for what is a very important program to us. Having said all that, we do have with us today Renee Alexander, who is Charles Lesperance's fiance, and Renee has been a longstanding supporter of this program. And Renee, do you want to say a few words before we start?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for continuing to include me in the NYMTC family. I can't think of a better way to honor your three fallen colleagues than to endow the gift of continued preparation in an academic environment, working with your transportation colleagues. So keep up the great work. I'm here as long as you are, and thank you. I congratulate the interns for their continued contribution. Thank you for including me.
Great, Renee. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your support over all these years. I think at this point, I turn it back over to Deb. So hope everyone enjoys the presentations, and good luck to the students.
Well, thank you. And as you mentioned, this program is done in partnership with the University Transportation Research Center. I would like to introduce Camille Kamga, the director of the UTRC at the City College of New York, and Camille will in turn introduce the student scholars. Camille?
And thank you, Deb, and thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Renee. This is very a pleasure to work with you guys since 2005, like Jerry mentioned, and to keep up the program. So we had a lot of good students, and this year is not an exception. So we have 4 students from CUNY, Columbia University, and NYU who's going to present their project. And at the meantime, I want to recognize Penny Eichmeyer. She was formerly with UTRC, and she's actually the one who worked with the student, with the 4 students. So, and Penny is on the call, so she's going to look at the presentation. So many of the students in the beginning, you work with Penny to set up all your project. And I would like also to really thank you to all the internship advisors to the student. And hopefully the student, during your presentation, I will really appreciate that you mentioned the names. I don't have that in front of me. So who you intern, some at New York City DOT and NYMTC, please try to give a great thank to all your advisors. And also the student also through the program, they have academic advisors. Some of them, I noticed Professor Conway, she's on the presentation. So she was advising Carla. And also they have the faculty advisor, if you can actually acknowledge your faculty advisor. So not to take too much time, I'm sure you received the invite that was sent by NYMTC, by Setu. I would like to thank Setu also, who worked along with Penny and myself to make sure that this program is successful. We're going to start with David Anton from Columbia University. And David is a second-year student in Master of Public Administration. I think David is graduating this year also. Many of the recipients of the presenter actually are either finishing or they have a year to complete the degree. And then we're going to move to Carla Tejada at CUNY, and Steph Kerr at NYU, and Nilufer Nouri at CUNY. I won't go into detail the project that they're doing, and then I'm sure during the presentation you can understand what they was working on. So I'm going to have David Anton to share his presentation and present. And David, you're going to have 15 to 20 minutes to present. And at the end of all the 4 presentations, we're going to have a Q&A session. And David?
That sounds great. Thank you so much. I'll share my screen shortly. Yeah, that should be all right. Okay, so before I begin, I just really I want to give a huge thanks to all my NYMTC advisors, to Deborah, to Ali, to Larissa, to Lynn, and Fola, who kindly guided me through this year-long endeavor. Thank you all so much for your guidance and advice. I really appreciate it. The study I conducted is called COVID-19 Impacts on Socioeconomic, Demographic, and Travel Demand Forecasts. So,
excuse me, David, could you put your camera on? We would love to see you.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. I thought I had done that. Of course.
No worries.
That's not an issue.
And that will apply to each of the student presentations, please.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I can't find.
That's all right. No worries.
Oh, that's it, right?
Not yet, but
awesome. Thank you.
There you are. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so jumping in first on the goals of the study. So COVID-19 had several impacts in New York City, in the New York metro area overall. But one of the most disruptive ones has been the rise in telework, in people working from home. So with the guidance of my advisors, I decided to focus on this phenomenon in particular among all the impacts COVID had. The research was grounded in 3 steps or 3 dimensions. The first one was understanding how many people were actually teleworking during COVID in the city, and doing so at a very granular geographic level, which was not captured by survey data. The second dimension was understanding how this strong increase in telework during COVID would persist over time and forecast these rates long term. And the third step was to estimate how this phenomenon could potentially affect the models and NYMTC uses to forecast socioeconomic and demographic variables, as well as travel behavior. So as I said, my area of study was the New York metro area, which for the purpose of this research consisted in 28 counties across New York State, New Jersey, and Connecticut. However, the way forecast models work is by estimating variables at a very granular level called traffic analysis zone, which is a subdivision of counties, and there are about 5,400 of these in the New York metro area. So a lot of my results were actually estimated at this level, which added a whole, we're estimated at this level to bring accuracy to this exercise, which added a whole other layer of complexity. But for the purpose of the presentation, all my results are expressed at the county level in order to facilitate their interpretation. So jumping on the first step of the research, which was telework during COVID-19. So once again, our objective was to measure the share of jobs that were conducted from home full-time during COVID, during COVID-19. The challenge we had is that there were no detailed surveys, at least at the granular level, at the granular geographic level. We had surveys on telework increase for the New York metro area overall during COVID, but this was only at the citywide level. There was no district and much less data at the traffic analysis zone level. So in order to estimate this, I decided on a 2-leg approach. The first one was estimating telework capability, which is the percentage of people whose occupations allow them to telework. And this is something that, because of data availability, was possible to do at the traffic analysis zone area. And then compare the broader aggregate results we got for telework capability at the New York, for the New York metro area with actual survey data, and try to make sense to what extent telework capability was actually reflecting the share of people who were actually teleworking. So first, on telework capability, the way I estimated and the methodology I used consisted in 4 steps. The first one was finding a criteria to determine which occupations could theoretically be done from home or not. And in order to do this, there was a very novel paper published last year that laid out a very helpful criteria. So I identified that criteria and decided to go with that. And then we match that criteria with regional occupational data that's available for each state. And this basically shows, this basically classifies the workforce among around 1,000 different occupations. So matching these two inputs, I was able to determine, at least at the theoretical level, the number of employees that were in occupations who could be done full-time from home and those people who didn't have that possibility. And then compare aggregate results with the limited survey data we had on actual telework rates in order to see to what extent this exercise was reflective of the current reality of the situation. So I'm going to jump ahead to a few of the more outstanding results I got. So this is the telework capability for the counties in New York City. So not surprisingly, New York County or Manhattan leads the way in the share of people who can telework. So 60% of people of jobs and so 50% of people who are in Manhattan are also people who are able to do their work from home full time. This rate it's lower for other counties and varies from 32% in Staten Island to 40% in the Bronx, but it's about 30% for each county. And then if we look at the broader metro area, we see that this telework capability really varies across the region. You have rates between 25 and 33% in more rural counties, and then you have really high. And then you have 60% in New York County, and then 40% in some, about 40% in some counties in New Jersey and Connecticut. So it really is all over the place. However, at the metro level, we saw, if we aggregate this for the entire area, what we reach is that 42% of all the workforce in the metro area could do their work full time, who do their work from home full time. And the limited survey data that was collected by U.S. Census from August 2020 to March 2021 estimated that between 43 and 50% of the workforce was actually teleworking. So what we see, the key result here is that this exercise, what this exercise reflected is that during COVID, and obviously within a margin of error, but that the share of people who could telework were also the ones who were teleworking. So the teleworking capacity, let's say, the percentage of the people in the city who could telework was around 100%. And so next, what we wanted to study is to forecast, how to forecast this trend. So we know how the situation was with telework during COVID. How is this going to persist over the future? So in order to draw this forecast, I relied again on a methodology with two steps. The first one was a very extensive review of surveys on telework expectations post-COVID. So people who focused towards people who were working from home. So the surveys would cover was that if you have been working from home full time during COVID, would you like to continue doing that or not in the near future after the pandemic is no longer a threat? And in order to select it, these were all surveys that cover expectations from both employers and employees on full-time telework, were representative of the entire US workforce and reflected on attitudes towards full-time telework versus not only work flexibility, which is much harder, which is going to the office or staying at home, like a mix between both, which is much harder to define. And once we had this survey review, this at a very broad level, what I used is previous data that was available from the American Community Survey on work from home rates to see how the results of the survey could evolve over time. So jumping in on the survey results, I detected 5 surveys that match the criteria I mentioned above. On one end, they asked with employee preferences. I mean, like they asked employees, if you have been teleworking during COVID, would you like to do that in the future? And the rate of people who said yes to this varied between 35 and 54%. And then these same people were also asked, if you want to telework, okay, but do you think your employer will allow that, or has your employer set up specific policies that you think will make that happen? And in those cases, obviously the results go lower because employers are more reluctant for their employees to turn over full time. So we saw a range between 15 and 28%. So discussing with my advisors, we decided to give preference to what employers plans are and what they think their employees should do, since we thought that was more realistic in terms of what's going to happen in the future. And so among these three values that we have, 21%, which is about a fifth of the workforce, is kind of a median scenario. So in order to draw future forecasts, we decided to focus on this median scenario of a fifth of the workforce that telework during COVID would continue or would be able to continue teleworking full time in the future. And with this, and on the basis of this number, which is short term after the pandemic, for let's say 2022, 2023, we use I use the American Community Survey from past years to forecast this until 2055, which is the time frame of NYMTC models. Next, I want to show how this forecast or these impacts on the long-term rise of telework could impact socioeconomic and demographic variables. So I work with this model, which is the socioeconomic and demographic forecast model from NYMTC. This SED model, socioeconomic and demographic model, forecasts a lot of variables. One of them is employment, but also where employment is going to be located across the entire area, the entire New York metro area. But we see that the location of employments would change if telework would increase. And it would change by area according to two effects, a positive and a negative effect. A negative effect, I called it the location of jobs effects, which is that if an area if there are jobs if pre-COVID there were jobs in an area that were conducted there and can now be done from home, then there's going to be a reduction of those. There's going to be a reduction of jobs located in that area, and then a positive effect, which is a labor force effect, which is that if in a specific area there are a lot of people who can telework or are teleworking, then the jobs located in that area, the location the jobs located in that area, the number of jobs located in that area would increase just because these people are now conducting their work from home, not in their office headquarters anymore. So having this exercise, we conducted this analysis long term for every year of the forecast, but I will show results for 2025 because it's nearer and it's more illustrative. And and these results are basically a new socioeconomic and demographic forecast model that incorporates these shifts in jobs location. So the first map is a map of New York City, the traffic analysis zone level. And the white areas show are those which are, let's say, are seeing a reduction in employment location. And those in green areas are the one where the number of jobs located there would increase. The main takeaway from this slide is that jobs would shift away from Manhattan below 59th Street, which is we call the central business district, which is the area demarcated in purple. But we see that these jobs will be mostly relocated to northern Manhattan and the rest of the metro area. We also see a similar result at the broader metro area level. Again, New York County would quote unquote lose, or like jobs, about 13% of jobs, let's say under this scenario, would be displaced from the city towards other counties, both in New York City itself, but also across the rest of across Long Island and New Jersey and other areas of New York State and Connecticut. And one of the implications of this is that because the location of jobs changes, workers or people's travel demand or travel behavior will also change. So we decided to do a sensitivity on NYMTC's travel demand forecast model to see how travel demand, how some aspects of travel demand could change with the rise in telework. So again, these models has several variables. The sensitivity we decided to evaluate was how the number of trips to our origin destination can change or would change if these changes in jobs location would occur. An important assumption here is that this is only a sensitivity, and we didn't assume any changes in modal split, which is how people will choose to travel in the future. And this is an important implication because there is very preliminary evidence that people, that people are traveling less in transit and could be driving more. So this is only a sensitivity, but that's allowed to get some insights of what are the aggregate level, what the impacts could be on where trips are going if these changes in jobs location take place. So the way the methodology works is that the socioeconomic forecast is an input in the travel behavior model. So we run the travel behavior model twice, once with the socioeconomic forecast without any changes. I mean, with jobs location pre-COVID, let's say, and then we run the model again with this SCD incorporating my predicted new jobs location. And then we compare scenarios. How will people travel if jobs locations don't change, and how people travel if those job locations do change? And these are the main results I got. So the table on the left is a comparison of daily trips to different areas of the city in a telework increase and a no telework scenario. So the main takeaway is that the total number of daily trips, they don't actually change between scenarios. The number of trips will remain similar regarding at the aggregate level. The number of trips people conduct will remain similar regardless of whether the jobs are located. However, we do see that trips to the central business district, which is again the area below, the Manhattan area below 59th Street, would be reduced. So we would see between these scenarios, we see a reduction of 8% in trips to the central business district. And in exchange, we see increases in trips to other areas, both of New York City, but also of other areas of the New York metro area, including Long Island, Mid-Hudson region, New Jersey, and Connecticut. In the right, I dive deeper into into the central business district, and the chart on the right compares trips to this area to the central business district from different areas of the city. So we see these trips that from all areas of the city to the CBD will decrease when contemplating the telework scenarios, with reduction in trips coming mostly from other parts of New York City, although reductions are prevalent all across the region. And finally, just a few conclusions of the exercise, or the main conclusion of the exercise is that almost half of the workforce telework full-time or during COVID-19 in the New York metro area. We see that a median scenario is for about a fifth of the workforce that did telework during COVID in the city to continue doing so in the long term. And then this change in telework would imply changes in jobs location, with over 10% of jobs currently in the CBD or that were located in the CBD prior to COVID relocating to other areas of the city. And that these changes in job location would impact travel behavior with significantly less trips towards the central business district. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm happy to answer any questions after all the presenters are finished. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. So our next presenter is Carla Tejada. Thank you, Carla.
Yeah, just give me a second to share the presentation. Okay. Okay, and let me start my timer just in case. Okay, thank you everybody for being here, and also thank you to the person to the people from NYMTC and from the UTRC that have put all this together. And I created these. I worked in modeling pedestrian demand in New York City with the New York City Department of Transportation, in particular with Paul Mercurio, Tara Esche, and with Katie Wolf, that I thank a lot for welcoming in the team and also for helping me. And also I'd like to thank you, Dr. Allison Conway, who has been a great mentor during these 4 years and in this project as well. So why is why is a pedestrian demand model important in a city, right? So I wish that we were in person to ask you how many people that live in New York City actually walked, I don't know, towards the subway station or towards the or towards, I don't know, the grocery store, how many pedestrian trips you actually took yesterday. And what a lot of people, a lot of cities have started to put a particular importance in pedestrian activity, most of it because it's one of the most convenience mode, it's one of the greenest traveling modes. And what is interesting for this, that even if it's so important, and it is what makes a city feel like a city, it's been left aside in the modeling and planning, mainly because of a problem that actually Anton talked about, which is the transportation analysis zones are too wide to capture actual pedestrian movements. And just a little bit of background for our city. This is the city in the United States where people walk the most. And actually 34% of trips were presented in the Citywide Mobility Survey. That is a survey that was created by the New York City DOT. 34% of people stated that they use walking as their solely mode of transportation. However, we can see that over 60% of trips include walking. So for instance, trips to the subway station, trips to the bus, trips to the city bike, and so on. So this is why it is so important to have a pedestrian demand model in a city such as New York City. So the methodology that we use is we based our work in a work already made by Dr. Clifton that analyzed the demand in Portland, Oregon. And what she did is that she used the original 4-step model that uses transportation analysis zones, and she adapted it to create a much smaller area of analysis, which are called pedestrian analysis zones. And then she adapted the 4-step model and created 4 steps in order to determine pedestrian trips in the city. And as far as we know, for New York City, there has similar studies done. So that's why it's so important. And what we did is create first the pedestrian analysis zones. And for this, we created a grid of squares that are 200 by 45 by 245 feet along the entire New York City, along all the 5 boroughs of New York City. These, along with other variables, allowed us to create a pedestrian index of the environment, which allow us to measure what is the weight of the environment and walking. And finally, all this and socioeconomic variables and origins and destinations allow us to determine the number of trips taken in the city. The base year of study for this project was 2019, mainly because we had a lot of information back then, and also 2020 created a lot of changes that we are still looking. So the major data input for this study was the Citywide Mobility Survey for 2019 that has has 1 main survey and then 6 small tables that are particular for some information that was gathered. And this is a representative survey for each neighborhood, and then some weights were applied to confirm that the survey was representative citywide. And among some of the variables that we can find in the Citywide Mobility Survey are, of course, socioeconomic variables such as gender, employment, and status, but also we can find household size and level of income. We can also, from the trip table, this is a subset of the entire Citywide Mobility Survey. And in here, what we can see is that people stated their mode choices and the number of trips they took. So this is a graphic presenting the break of all the trips, of all the different trips that people took. And actually, after processing and after looking at all the variables that we needed, we ended up that 21.93% in this survey were reported as using walking as a transportation mode. Then we also can see the location records of the Citywide Mobility Survey, and this is very important because it shows us for 1 week where people started their trips. And this is very important for these type of modelings, and this is what allowed us to actually make the analysis at a pedestrian analysis zone, which is very, very small. And then there were other data inputs that include bike access, park access, transit, and the density of jobs and population. And then one very important measure that we call the living environment, which gathers data from grocery stores, restaurants, school, commercial areas that were actually gathered from New York State open data, New York City open data, and the Census Bureau, and United States Census Bureau. So all of these came together, and we applied first a binomial choice model that allow us to generate the pedestrian index of the environment. So in this index, what we wanted to measure is what is the weight of all of the variables presented above, all of the environment variables presented above in the decision of walking. How does each variable affect the probability that a person would walk? Then we processed the data, we processed the results that we obtained, and we created this index. And it's very interesting to know and to see in this map that it's very impacting that, of course, areas such as the southern part of Manhattan and the southern part of Bronx present a lot of areas in the environment that are attractive for people to walk to. And then another thing that we found very interesting are 3 hotspots that show how walking is important in these 3 areas. And just to give you a little bit more information about these areas, the first one is Flushing. And this is located in Queens. And just as one variable of reference, if you want to actually see a number, this is one of the most used, this area has one of the most used subway stations in Queens, and which is Flushing Main Street, where only the line 7 goes there. And the annual ridership for this subway station was 17.5 million people. And besides this, having a lot of variety in restaurants and grocery stores, you can imagine that all the people that left the subway station in this area actually left there, most likely left this station by walking. The second area presenting similar characteristics is Jackson Heights. This is actually on 74th and Broadway, the second most important subway station in Queens in terms of annual ridership. And then finally, we have this little area here, which we decided to call downtown Brooklyn. And in this area, people who know, there are actually a lot of subway stations there, including Atlantic Avenue and Barclays Center. And all of these subway stations move over 30 million people annually. So that is why these hotspots, if you see this map, maybe you can think this is sort of a cartoon, but actually it's not. And it represents how the city works, how the environment of the city affects the decision of walking. And once we had this information that was very important to understand what drives people to walk, we could go to the trip distribution model, for which we developed a destination choice model. And in here, we actually implemented other variables, such as, for example, socioeconomic variables, the road compositions of New York City, which actually tells us in which road can people actually walk, which is pedestrian friendly. And then we also include the pedestrian index of the environment, and we divide these by the type of trips. All of these looking to answer the question, what is the probability of people of people walking in a PAZ? And in order to determine how many trips in each PAZ were occurring. And then we divided, for this part, we did 3 binomial choice, destination choice models. One that only included trips that were home-based to work, the other one that was home-based to other location, and finally a non-home-based trips. These are actually some of the main categories that we find in the literature, so that is why we decided to use only these 3 models. And here I'm not gonna go into technicalities because there are a lot, but I'm here gonna present the results that we had. And again, these are, even if this looks at citywide maps, the results need to be analyzed at a PAZ level. And that's why there is the zoom part on the left-hand side. And basically what we're looking is that most of the walking trips to work occur in the Manhattan area, where there is a lot of population density and also a lot of job density. And actually what this could suggest, these results suggested, is that to work, most people use another transportation mode. And again, just as a note here, these modes could include walking, but a lot of people, for instance, just state, I go to work by the subway or just taking the bus. And these a lot of these trips were lost just because of a lack of information. So we run this this graphic to actually see how many people walk to their jobs, and we can see that actually walking does not take part along most days to this destination and from work, right? Then we got the results from home base to another location. And what we can see here is that the map starts becoming more dense. And in this case, this was the model where the PIE, which is the pedestrian index of the environment, and road accessibility have some of the most important positive impacts for the decision of walking in each PAZ. So what this allows us to conclude is that actually the environment is very important. Also, the different origins and destinations seem to have an impact, but the most important was the PIE and the road accessibility. And then finally, for non-home-based trips, we can see that even though the PIE and the road accessibility is important and it still has a significant positive impact in the decision of walking, actually age and household size have the most important impact. So in this case, for non-home-based trips, actually the socioeconomic variables are more important to understand in order to see how the trip distribution works. And the one thing that we found across all the models and across all the results is that actually as the trip distance increases, the probability of a person walking diminishes. So if I live in a PAZ that is 5 miles away from a location, the probability that I walk there is going to be very low. But if I can find a lot of things accessible within my PAZ, then it is the probability that I walk is going to be higher. And then some of the potential applications of this model within New York City DOT, and that could potentially be helpful for the city and for NYMTC if they want to expand this, is that we could refine the PIE as a measure of the environment and use and have it feed the proximity model. And then we can also use it as a planning tool to analyze everything at a PAZ level, which is a much smaller area than the transportation analysis zone. And then also, it is very interesting to understand the socioeconomic results and to understand what is the equity behind walking. As said before, there is a lot of weight from socioeconomic variables, above all from non-home-based trips. But then this model, and along all this year, we found some limitations that are mainly due because of the lack of specific data. And then it would be amazing for pedestrian and for pedestrian demand to have a network level analysis that will allow us to understand which road does a pedestrian take or something like that, that will allow us to, take better decisions. And then the other thing about this model is, due to the lack of data and due to the lack of follow-up, that there is a need for more data in future years, so as we can refine and improve the outcomes of this model and to bottom line validate this model. And with this, I finish my presentation, and I would like to thank again all of you for being here. I like to thank again everybody at New York City DOT and Dr. Conway for all her support this year. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them after everybody has presented.
Thank you, Carla. So now we'll have Steph Kerr give his presentation.
Let me get this up and running.
Thank you.
1 second. Can you see my screen? Is it full screen?
Not yet. Yep, now we can see it full screen.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here. I will be presenting on my project for federal infrastructure condition monitoring and financial forecasting. Quick outline of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be focusing on some other really great best practices in other MPOs across the country for infrastructure management and condition monitoring, as well as financial forecasting. Talk about a project I worked on for creating a checklist and then making some recommendations. The objectives of my project this year were to benchmark best practices at other MPOs across the country, specifically in federal infrastructure condition monitoring and revenue and expenditure forecasting, with the main focus being on regional transportation plans at the MPO level. It's really important to note that infrastructure condition monitoring and financial forecasting are intricately linked. Infrastructure monitoring plays a big portion in how much revenue is going to be available and how much expense is going to happen throughout the course of a regional transportation plan. So these two topics are very much intertwined. And the last piece of this of my project was initiating a step-by-step checklist for the financial forecasting portion of the regional transportation plan, the financial chapter for NYMTC. A quick clarification point is many of the acronyms for the MPOs that I benchmarked are really long and cumbersome. So you'll hear me refer to those MPOs by the city or the area they represent. For example, DVRPC is the MPO for Philadelphia, but I'm just going to refer to it as Philadelphia for clarification purposes. These are the lists of the 12 MPOs that we benchmarked against. As you can see on the right, there are long and cumbersome acronyms for these MPOs, and on the left are the cities these MPOs represent. We have representation from the West Coast, the Midwest, and the East Coast, of course. A really important thing that I want to highlight is all MPOs are not created equal. There's a lot of differences in terms of political realities, areas of focus, staffing levels, contractor usage. The reason I bring this up is I realize that some of these best practices may not fit into NYMTC's framework for many different reasons. That's not a bad thing, but I just wanted to highlight some of these great practices so they can be considered at least. So now we'll go into a quick overview of infrastructure condition monitoring and some unique highlights from MPOs across the country. So I want to quickly go over kind of the process for infrastructure condition monitoring. For those of you who aren't familiar, cities, counties, and state governments play an enormous role in monitoring and maintaining federal infrastructure. That's highways, that's bridges, that's transportation, public transportation infrastructure. And two of the main ways they do this inspection is they have the physical methods, of course, going out there in person and looking at the infrastructure, but there are also very advanced techniques now. They have vans, for example, that have sophisticated camera technology and radar, LiDAR technology that can go and take really sophisticated measurements of bridges and tunnels and highways. And that information is used to assess the condition of these pieces of infrastructure. They even have drones now that can go out and do inspections on bridges. And a lot of this inspection information gets fed into software systems, bridge and pavement management systems. And these software systems allow these different levels of government to do really sophisticated, complex deterioration models and predictive analysis on when is a bridge or when is a road going to reach a point where it needs an intervention and what kind of intervention is best recommended. So these software systems, and I'll talk more about them in later slides, are very important to this process of infrastructure condition monitoring. And a big trend that I've seen in my benchmarking is the country at all levels of government moving away from the worst first mentality to asset management and life cycle process. Historically, different levels of government have waited till a piece of infrastructure, a bridge or a highway, gets to its absolute worst condition before they decide to intervene and do a rehab or a complete remodel. And part of this is not the best way to do things, as we've seen in recent research and studies. So they're moving away from that to an asset management life cycle where there's more consistent intervention. The big reason for this is because we have limited funding, and these sophisticated interventions with the asset management and life cycle help us manage that limited funding. And of course, the overall importance of infrastructure condition monitoring has to do first and foremost with safety. And after that, it has to do with prolonging the longevity of pieces of equipment. So we'll go straight into the examples of best practices. So San Francisco, their NYMTC has a very well-known and well-regarded pavement management system. It's called Street Saver, and they created it at the NPO level in the 80s, and they've been refining it ever since. And they've actually licensed it out to different cities, counties, NPOs, and private entities across the country and even the world. And this helps the Bay Area cities and the NPO make better, more informed pavement investment decisions. And other NPOs like Reno RTC in Nevada use Street Saver as well. Other NPOs are licensing this program to help assist them in doing their infrastructure condition monitoring. This is a snapshot of what that system looks like. This is a dashboard from Street Saver, and it is providing all kinds of wonderful information. Of course, this is information that's fed into the system through inspections. But for example, PCI is pavement condition index. You have network inventories. It's a very useful system for monitoring conditions, and of course, being used for financial analysis as well. Moving on, San Francisco, on their transit side, the public transit side, has a really sophisticated infrastructure database that all 25 Bay Area transit operators use. They feed condition data for the assets into this system. It's web-based, and it allows the NPO to take that information and assess state of good repair, and also to use that information to do financial analysis. They do that at the NPO level, but the local agencies are also able to use this same system to do a lot of that analysis as well. So it's useful at multiple levels. RTCI, the infrastructure database, actually feeds into the Federal Transit Administration's version of this called Term Light, and MTC staff actually customized the FTA's version, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. This is the slide after this one. This is a snapshot of what kind of information the Regional Transit Capital Inventory talks about. So in this piece of data, it shows the revenue vehicles above useful life. It's a data visualization of this for the different categories, light rail and bus. This came out of that capital inventory. So FTA Term Light customization, MTC staff, the MPO for San Francisco, took the federal level system and modified it to better serve their needs. Historically, they've done specific funding in a way that didn't allow them to allocate based on eligible assets. So the staff went ahead and adapted this, and now they can just have a distinction between funding sources that wasn't technically possible before, and allows for more accurate allocation of funding in fiscally constrained scenarios, which a lot of NPOs across the country are using in their regional transportation plans, realizing how challenging funding can be. Atlanta also uses an infrastructure database. ARC is the NPO representing them. They have a Tableau-based online asset management system as well, and transit agencies there feed their data in annually for this, and it allows ARC to do capital planning, decision support, and state of good repair assessments. So they're another NPO that's using this really wonderful system. We'll transition into financial overview and unique NPO financial highlights. So a quick overview for financial forecasting at the federal level. The most common method to do this is historical trend analysis and econometric models. NPOs are using these in the regional transportation plans to generate the financial chapters. And expert consensus is another big piece. Most NPOs have maybe 1, 2, 3 people who've been doing financial planning for the NPO and the regional transportation plan for years, and they just have that inside knowledge that they're able to have that inside track to do their modeling off of experience. NPOs rely heavily on state DOT data and transit agency data for their financial forecasting. Oftentimes the NPOs are not going out themselves and doing infrastructure monitoring and monitoring the different aspects of the infrastructure system in their regions. Are relying on contractors or partner agencies to do that. And then statewide MPO associations are actually doing some financial forecasting on behalf of the MPOs in their state. Michigan does this. They have a statewide MPO association. The local MPOs will feed their information to the state level, and then the state will do the bulk of the financial forecasting on behalf of all the MPOs in the state. One of the big aspects that I want to highlight out of financial forecasting is something that's happening in Texas. Texas DOT maintains a system called Transportation Revenue and Needs Determination System. It's an acronym, of course. It's a web-based, publicly accessible tool for forecasting revenues and expenses. And local MPOs have access to this. They have modules specifically within Trends that they can upload their specific information, and the state level routinely updates the Trend system. Some things are done monthly, like cash forecasts and letting schedules, and other aspects are done annually, for example, demographic information. So the MPOs can go into the system, upload their information. It combines with state level and federal information that's fed into the system, and it allows them to do their financial forecasting. And this was created by the Texas Department of Transportation in conjunction with the Texas Tech Transportation Institute. This is a quick snapshot of what that system looks like. Anyone can Google this and go into this system. The local options represent the MPOs. For example, we benchmarked against Houston Galveston and also Dallas, and they use this system in their financial forecasting for their regional transportation. And they can go into their specific module and do the forecasting through this system. Transition into the forecasting checklist that was part of my project. Initially, a lot of great work was done by Max Sokol. He was a September 11th intern in 2011. He built this really comprehensive guidebook to financial forecasting. My task was to update that and distill it down into a more of a checklist kind of format. And the main goals were to have continuity as people within NYMTC retire or move on to other opportunities. Someone coming in to do the financial forecasting chapter within the regional transportation plan, it would be helpful to have a source document so they're not coming in and having to figure everything out from scratch themselves. And as we know, financial forecasting is extraordinarily complex with multiple steps, sometimes happening simultaneously. So ensuring these steps aren't missed is another goal of the checklist. As part of this, I reached out to 17 MPOs, 5 beyond the ones I benchmarked to see if they have something similar. Unfortunately, none of them had a finished product, but Philadelphia DVRPC is developing one and actually said it will probably be available in 2022 if we would like to reach out to them and compare our checklist with theirs. This is a snapshot of what that checklist looks like. This specifically is dealing with the revenue forecast for the federal transportation authorizations that come up every 5 years, and looking at escalation rates involved with that process to anticipate, the minimum regional transportation plan has 20 years, usually as a minimum time period. How many successor acts are there going to be? What's the escalation rate? What can we anticipate to get in funding from act to act in totality for that 20-year period? I'll move into my recommendations. I think that it would be wonderful to explore a standardized payment management system for NYMTC and its members like StreetSaver has. It's definitely a system worth looking into to see if this might be able to be adopted here. A trends model like what Texas has, New York State Department of Transportation may be interested in looking at providing something similar, working with MPOs in the state. It looks like Texas has a really successful option down there that might be able to be replicated here. Web-based infrastructure databases, both like San Francisco and like Atlanta have, could provide great situational awareness on infrastructure condition and then provide a useful tool for financial forecasting. Exploring financial forecasting initiative for the statewide MPO. New York State has a statewide MPO association. It may be interesting to them to look at something like Michigan does, where the data is provided to them from the local MPOs and they do a standardized statewide forecast process. And then of course, coordinating with other MPOs like Philadelphia to compare our financial checklist with theirs once they finish it in 2022. And I want to say thank you to my supervisor, Jerry, and the NYMTC and UTRC staff. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at this email if you don't say them today at the end of this session. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, thanks, Seth. So now I'll ask Niloufar to bring up her presentation and turn on her camera and go for it.
Sorry, let me just stop sharing.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today at this presentation. My name is Niloufar Nouri. I'm from City University of New York, City College. Before I start the results of my research during the past year, I would like to thank my supervisors, Dr. Ali Afshar and Mr. Mike Chume and Mr. Monish Patel, and our director, Miss Deborah Nelson, for their guidance and support during the year, and all the NYMTC staff for providing the opportunity and making the arrangements for this meeting. My research is about the future of travel survey and using alternative data collection for future travel surveys. I'm gonna quickly go over the outline of the project. I'm gonna, at the very first step, I'm gonna introduce research objectives, and I'm gonna introduce all available travel survey data nationwide. And then I'm gonna present the recent improvement in travel survey, which has been conducted by NPOs across the US. And then I will introduce alternative travel data collections and the challenges and strengths of each big data options for travel survey. And then we'll present the question that we need to ask from a data provider, and at the end, the summary and conclusion of the findings. The objective and goal of this research is to investigate what are the alternative data collection method to be used for travel survey, and to be used like instead of travel survey or to complement travel survey, and to evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses of some of the big data sources for this purpose, and to see what we need to consider when we want to choose such alternatives. This is the first available nationwide travel survey data is for National Household Travel Survey, which includes daily, non-commercial travel by all the modes, and including the characteristics of the people traveling and their household and their vehicles. And the most recent one is from 2017, which is a completed survey obtained from around 130,000 households. And these are the travel data which is collected through this survey. At the household level, they have number of people, drivers, workers, and vehicles, and household income. At the personal level or individual level, they collect age, sex, driver status, and worker status, and annual miles. At a vehicle level, they collect the model of or manufacturer of the vehicle, the age of vehicle, years owned, etc. And then finally, at the travel diary, they collect origin and destination information, the start and end point of the trip duration, distance of the trip, and vehicle type, if household vehicle, which one, and then the wait time of the vehicle, of the transportation. And other information on travel diary include detailed purpose of the trip and number of passengers, and most recent trips for non-traveler. The second one, the second data set, nationwide data set that we have is American Community Survey, which like collects data on a ongoing basis from January to December every year, and they collect social characteristics, including like education or marital status, fertility, and they collect economic characteristics, income, employment. They collect household characteristics like their occupancy and structure, housing value and cost, and they collect demographic characteristics like age, sex, and race or housing unit. Next, we have CTPP, which is the Census Transportation Planning Products, which is tailored for transportation planning and application and the travel model validation or calibration. And this information is organized by residence or workplace or by commute from home to work. And finally, we have the travel survey conducted by NYMTC in 2011, which is a regional household travel survey, and it includes travel statistics for the region for use in New York NYBPM travel demand model. And the trip data is derived from like around 19,000 households across the 28 counties in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And it also includes a subsample of around 2,000 households, which use the like GPS, carryable GPS devices. These are the lessons learned from the recent survey by various MPOs across the United States. First of all, we need to have more frequent survey with smaller sample instead of traditional studies every 8 to 10 years. And we need to have like combined data collection, using telephone, mail, web, and an application to collect the travel survey data. And a 3-stage survey design is common among all the surveys recently done by MPO. At the very first stage, there is a screener recruitment where mail invitation packets with pre-incentive sent, and then there is an extended questionnaire to obtain a completed roster of people, vehicles, and like other detailed demographic and socioeconomic information. And then the third stage will be the travel diary, which is for data retrieval questionnaire. And collecting demographic information during the recruitment phase is a key step for conducting a travel survey, because we need to provide a sample which is a representative of the entire region. And also recently, most of the MPOs are using smartphone app in their survey design as a complement of travel diary. At least 20% of the population, the sample population, are encouraged to use a application to collect data along with the manual travel survey or the web-based travel survey. So the alternative data collection for travel survey is using a passive data. What is the passive data? Data that is collected without explicit or noticeable interaction with a person. There are two types of passive data. Type 1 is data collected, is the data that is collected through a device to increase responses from survey. An example could be a smartphone app that collect data of trip duration and routes. And there's some advantages with this type of data, which is more accurate and more clean, and it lowers the response burden. And then there is a second type, which is the data collected for purposes other than travel behavior research, but will be useful in certain travel analysis further. For example, a mobile app which is request to know where its users are, then it provide useful information from the surrounding area, so that users know which restaurant to go, or which rideshare to get. And so a developer for that app may know where its users are at different time of the day, and then they can use that information for travel analysis further. The alternative data collection methods can be like cellular network-based data, which is a database which is collected by telecommunication companies. And then we have GPS data and automatic vehicle location, and which are the installed GPS devices in the vehicle, which collects time and location and status of transport. And we have like location-based services, which are like the several types of application on a smartphone that require location information to properly function, for example, mapping or ride sharing. And these applications receive a device location through GPS or Wi-Fi positioning system, depending on device setting. And then they pass the location to the developer, and developer use that to improve their products. And then they can resell that data as a LBS service, like location-based service. And finally, we have smartphone sensor-based data, which are like collected by smartphone app, for instance, when we check in information from social media like Twitter or Facebook. I'm gonna go like deeper into this call data records, or CDR. So CDR is a record generated by telecommunication equipment that document details of incoming or outgoing calls, text messages, or a connection to an app, web browser, on checking an email. And it's easily available because most of the telecom services, service providers maintain this data mostly for billing purposes. And two types of signals trigger the recording of location. In this case, active signal when users make calls or use internet, and then passive signal when user receive call or text. And the amount and frequency of CDR data depends on usage pattern and the number of applications installed. So the location of device are less accurate, and it can be like 50 or it can be 300 meters, because locations are estimated with triangulation, so it has pretty poor spatial accuracy. So some of the challenges with CDR is unreported trips, and because like users may not carry the cell phone during all of their travel, and the cell phone may not be used heavily for calls, texts, or internet access, and the cell phone device may not pick up a signal. All of these can result to unreported trips. And it has, like, as I said, poor spatial precision because of the method that estimate with triangulation. And cell phone also cannot observe characteristic of travelers, and in the absence of socioeconomic data in this case, it's hard to do market segmentation. And then trip purpose also need to be inferred, and when there is a mixed land use, it is difficult to identify what is the origin or destination of the land use when the land is being used by mixed purposes. Here, I basically compare the three types of big data options for transportation analytics. The cellular data, which is the CDR data from cellular tower triangulation, which has a precision about 50 to 300 meters spatial precision, and then the navigation GPS, which is from vehicles and trucks, cars and trucks, with a 3 to 5 meters spatial precision. And then we have location-based services with 5 to 25 meters spatial precision. And among the strengths of cellular tower data, it had large sample size because telecom companies have more than 25 million customers. And other strength is the ability to infer home and work location with this type of data through machine learning methods. And regarding the GPS, it has more and very frequent pings, so it has like very precise location, and it also like distinguish between personal and commercial trips. And LBS data also has a pretty large sample, and it also provides like more frequent ping rates, not as much as GPS, but like the accuracy is not as much as GPS, but it's still pretty good accuracy. So we already went through the challenges with CDR data, like poor spatial precision, and like one other like weakness of this type of data is that it couldn't distinguish between personal and commercial trips. They're not separable in this type of data, and it cannot reliably infer a mode of transportation, and it might have poor coverage in rural areas, so we might have like some bias in the data because like poor coverage areas are not included in the data set. And then GPS, the main concern with the GPS is lower sample size comparing to the CDR, and it cannot infer non-vehicular modes of transportation. And regarding weaknesses of LBS, it has like less suppliers, and the sample size may vary across different data providers, and it can infer trip purpose and trip mode, but it's on an aggregated level. So what we need to consider when we are supposed to get the data from data vendor or data provider. First of all, we need to ask, what is the source of raw data in their platform? Is it like application-based GPS? Is it a call detail record, or is it vehicle GPS? And what filtration or cleaning processes are performed on raw data? Does data source belong to a specific user profile, which could be like inducing a source of bias in the data in that case? And the next question is that like, what is the trip breaking criteria that they use for like distinguishing different types of trips and to infer like home and work locations or other locations? And we need to ask, on average, how many devices are captured in like urban areas and rural areas, noting that like some devices may never like leave home, then they will induce bias in the data. And then like finally, like what normalization techniques are used for that data to correct it and to clean it? And what is the methodology for expanding the sample data, and is it a good representation of the sample of the target region? And like other question would be like, what modes of travel data are presented, and how these travel modes are determined, like basically the methods that they infer like trips, destination and ends. And asking about data privacy and how they like anonymize the data to like respect the privacy of their users, and how do they control for geographical or demographical biases in their data to include like all categories of socioeconomic characteristics of the sample. So the conclusion and the key findings of these projects, first of all, the challenges of passive data. There are some challenges associated with different procedures of this data, like in the collection or in the processing and analyzing of big data. There are challenges, and they need to be addressed by employing for planning purposes. For example, there are like data gaps such as like discontinuity in the location data, like errors and missing information, and like trip purposes or accompanying travelers are not explicitly recorded in that type of data. And then we have like a lack of demographic information and the absence of personal or social demographic information of the users, which are the key inputs to some of the traditional model, is a big challenge for this type of data. And regarding the future of using big data, we can say that the use of LBS or location-based services is becoming increasingly common, which reflect the improved spatial accuracy in this type of data. And passive data, whether they are CDR or LBS, can only infer trip ends unless they are accompanied with travel survey. So we can think of them as a complement of travel survey, not a replacement of travel survey. And making a comparison between the results of like actual survey, which has been done previously, with the estimated trip from a data provider will be very beneficial and helpful to select among different data options. And there are some like advantages and disadvantages of using a smartphone app besides self-reporting methods in a travel survey. But some of the advantages will be like lower marginal cost of collecting data, of course, from the same respondents. And when we use app for collecting data, it provides user with the option to edit errors in their travel survey. And it has more accuracy regarding the origin and destination and the travel time. And it's obviously can increase respondent rate as it will reduce the time spent on like filling the survey. But there are like disadvantages as well. For example, like one of the most common disadvantages of this kind of app is that they use so much background data. It depleted like phone batteries within few hours. So the user might not be willing to use that for travel survey voluntarily. And it doesn't like capture underground commutes. It can buy a sample because it can log any data from underground trips. It can't log any data from the trips which is being the underground commutes, and unless like there are some kind of networks on board. And it seems to work fine in urban areas, but the collected data is corrupted when someone like is going to a poor cell phone area. And there are some like app might crash, so previous records might be deleted, so it might have some burden on users. And there are some privacy concerns, of course, with the app, which the app provider needs to be careful about it. And also, like it can like induce bias into the sample, because like younger population and high-income households tend to use more of this app rather than like the traditional travel diary. The other key findings of this research, again, is conducting more frequent survey with smaller sample size rather than like every 8 or 10 years in traditional surveys. And running a pilot survey before the main survey is a common practice in recent surveys of MPOs, which help to like identify the issues with the survey and to estimate like the respondent rate and to have a better sample representation in the initial stages of the travel survey. So with this, I'm going to end this presentation. Thank you everyone for your attention, and thank you for being here. I would be happy to answer your question after all the present. I guess I'm the last one.
Yes. Yep. Thank you, Niloufar. So, hi, my name is Jessica Ortiz. I'll serve as the moderator for this question and answer portion. If all of the student presenters could share their cameras, then we can get started. Currently, we only have 2 questions in the queue. So if you do have a question, please type that into the chat and I will make sure it gets to the correct student. So our first question comes from Keith Miller for David, and he says, another potential impact of teleworking on the SED model is that people working from home may no longer be tied to living within a reasonable commute from their old job location. Was this impact considered in your analysis? If not, any thoughts on how to incorporate this impact in the SED model?
Yeah, we did. When the research, when I started my research, I did an entire literature review of what were the different impacts of COVID before focusing on telework in particular. And one of the issues that did come up, it was that at the time, this was in September last year, so there was a lot of hype about people leaving the city and moving to Miami or moving to other areas in, leaving the main areas of New York to move to the suburbs. It was very hard to incorporate that, given that the evidence was very anecdotal, and also, yeah, I think that it proved right that we didn't do that, because long term, like now, the data, at least preliminary data that's available, says that there was not, at the aggregate level, at least a significant or long term shift between where people were moving. So, where people were moving. So it's not considered on the analysis. I think that if anything, it could be incorporated the impact in the SED model if you analyze now the ACS, the American Community Survey data for 2020, or other data for 2020 that was not available last year when I started the project. But yes, it's definitely a hypothesis that could be done with more newly available data.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Jerry Bogas, and this is for Carla. So are the trips you measured walk only or walking as a primary mode?
Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, when we process the data, of course, the 21% of the trips are walking only, but what we try to do in order to incorporate all the micro movements was to include that in the analysis. And how we did that is because on the citywide mobility survey, there is a part that specifies the legs of the trip, and then you could answer that. But most of the data we have is walking only. So yeah, it's walking only, and this is one of the major things that one of the major conflicts that we found when we were running the models and sort of creating the concept of the model, because we do lose a lot of information. But again, this is because of the nature of the survey, not necessarily because we didn't want to include this in the model. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, perfectly. Thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I will hand it over to Deb for our concluding thoughts. And I personally want to thank you all for presenting today, and thank you to all of your mentors who helped you throughout the process.
Well, yes, thank you, Jessica. And I echo your thanks. Warm thanks to David, Carla, Seth, and Nilufar. It's very clear that you've all put in some commendable efforts, very impressive projects and remarkable results. I think that we can say that Ignatius, Charles, and Shum have certainly left a legacy. As Jerry said, this program started in 2005, and we've had over 4 dozen research projects that have been undertaken that have really helped to shape the future of our research in the NYMTC region. So in memory and honor of our last NYMTC colleagues, we're able to provide this mentoring and support to the academic students and for the professional development of these students and for future students. And as a matter of fact, we're in a position where we can announce for more remarkable student scholars for this program, and I believe they are actually joined us for this brown bag so they could see the great work of the students before them. I'd like to extend a warm welcome and congratulations to Julia Amarelle, who will work with the NYMTC staff on the analysis of socioeconomic and demographics methodologies and forecasting solutions. We look forward to working with you, Julia. Also, Fabian Bartsch will be working with New York City Department of Transportation to develop a racial equity performance measures. Christina Mejia Consolado will also be working with New York City DOT on their framework for the next generation coordinated street furniture franchise. And Liang Tao will work with New York City DOT on a project entitled Infrastructure is Public Space, Building Healthy, Resilient, and Sustainable Corridors for Pandemic Response and Recovery. And as you can see, it's quite a range of topics. And good for New York City, you're going to get 3 of our STAR students. And we're pleased at NYMTC staff that we will get a STAR student. Congratulations again to David, Carla, Seth, and Nilufar for your research accomplishments and your excellent presentations. We wish you well in the future, and we're very pleased to have worked with you this past year, and we hope that you don't forget us. And again, welcome and congratulations to Julia, Fabian, Christina, and Liang. We look forward to working with you this upcoming year. You can see why we get very energized and excited at NYMTC to be able to work with our students and our future leaders, and to help, like I said, as you help to shape the research, and we hope to shape you as professionals. We too are shaped by this, and you bring new ideas, new energy, and we really, really appreciate this program. So thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your support and your interest in this program and in our regional planning efforts. We wish you all well and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
so
good
much.
day.
Thank you.